When the world heard the word Blitzkrieg for the first time, it echoed with fear and confusion. Translated from German, it meant lightning war, and lightning was exactly what it felt like. A strike so fast, so sudden, so overpowering, that by the time you realized it had begun, it was already too late. But Blitzkrieg wasn't just speed. It was precision. It was coordination. It was psychological warfare, a strategy designed not just to defeat, but to paralyze. It wasn't born in a laboratory or a single general's mind. It was the product of desperation, innovation, and brutal calculation in the wake of Germany's humiliation after World War I. The Treaty of Versailles had stripped Germany of its military pride, leaving it broken, disarmed, and humiliated. But beneath that quiet surface, new ideas were fermenting. New doctrines were being written. And in military academies and secret training camps, a revolution in warfare was taking shape. Unlike the slow, grinding trench warfare of World War I, Blitzkrieg was about momentum. It was about breaking through enemy lines with overwhelming force and never letting them recover. It relied on tight integration of tanks, aircraft, artillery, and infantry, all communicating and moving in unison, like a living organism. This approach didn't just win battles. It shattered the will of nations. Poland learned this in September 1939. In just over a month, the German Wehrmacht overran Polish defenses, despite the bravery of its soldiers. The Polish army, still structured for a different era of warfare, was overwhelmed by the speed and coordination of the Blitzkrieg. The Luftwaffe destroyed airfields, bridges, railways. Panzer divisions rolled in, bypassing fortifications, encircling entire armies. The Polish command couldn't react fast enough. They couldn't understand what was happening. And by the time they tried to reposition, they were already cut off. It wasn't just Poland. France, a country prepared for a defensive war with its formidable Maginot Line, was caught completely off guard. They had expected a slow German advance through Belgium, similar to World War I. But the Germans sent decoy forces into Belgium while their main panzer thrust sliced through the Ardennes forest, a region the French believed was impassable for tanks. That belief cost them their country. Within weeks, French and British forces were encircled. The evacuation of Dunkirk saved thousands of lives, but it couldn't save France. Paris fell in June 1940, and the Blitzkrieg seemed unstoppable. Nations began to fear not just German weapons, but the idea that no defense could stand against the Blitz. Blitzkrieg was not invincibility, but it created that illusion. And in war, illusions can be as powerful as bombs, but Blitzkrieg was more than military innovation. It was theater. It was psychological warfare. The use of Stuka dive bombers with sirens designed to terrify. The precision timing of tank assaults and paratrooper landings. The relentless newsreels portraying Nazi Germany as unbeatable. It broke enemy morale long before soldiers surrendered. And it gave Germany the appearance of invincibility even when they were, in fact, pushing their luck. In reality, Blitzkrieg had limitations. It required precise planning, perfect timing, favorable terrain, and air superiority. It depended on short campaigns. Because the logistical structure of the Wehrmacht was not built for prolonged war. German supply lines were often stretched. Vehicles broke down. Troops grew exhausted. But in those early years, none of that mattered. Because no one had yet figured out how to stop it. In the invasion of the Low Countries, the Netherlands and Belgium were taken with frightening efficiency. Airborne troops captured key bridges and airfields before the defenders even knew they were under attack. Entire units surrendered after being surrounded without a single shot. The speed was more devastating than any bomb. Civilians fled in panic, clogging roads, making defense even harder. The idea was not just to win battles but to sow chaos, to make nations collapse under their own confusion. And it worked. Again and again. Until it didn't. The first cracks appeared in the skies over Britain. The Blitzkrieg met resistance during the Battle of Britain, where the Royal Air Force held its ground. The Luftwaffe had to adapt from precision support of ground troops to strategic bombing. It was a different kind of war. And in this arena, Britain prevailed, yet, Hitler still believed in Blitzkrieg. When he turned his sights eastward toward the Soviet Union in 1941, he unleashed the largest Blitzkrieg campaign in history. Operation Barbarossa. Over 3 million German soldiers crossed into Soviet territory, supported by thousands of tanks and aircraft. In the first weeks, the results were staggering. Entire Soviet divisions were encircled and annihilated. Cities fell one by one. The Red Army was in chaos, its leadership decimated by Stalin's purges, its soldiers often under-equipped and under-trained. But then the Russian roads turned to mud. The autumn rains slowed the German advance. Then came winter. And then came the Soviet counterattacks. Blitzkrieg, for all its brilliance, had not prepared the Germans for a war of attrition in a vast, freezing land. Supply lines collapsed. Engines froze. Soldiers died not from bullets, but from the cold. Blitzkrieg had reached its limit. The idea of lightning war depended on short, sharp campaigns. It was never designed for long-term occupation or guerrilla resistance. And the deeper Germany pushed into enemy territory, the more vulnerable it became. Blitzkrieg was like a blade, sharp, fast, deadly, but only as long as it kept moving. The moment it stopped, it lost its power. And in the vast expanses of Russia, the Germans stopped. Soviet resilience turned the tide. The Battle of Stalingrad marked the beginning of the end. Urban warfare, street by street, building by building, was the antithesis of Blitzkrieg. It was slow, grinding, brutal. And the Soviets would not yield. They bled for every inch of their city, and eventually, they encircled and destroyed an entire German army. After that, the myth of Blitzkrieg began to unravel. It had not been magic. It had been situational. A brilliant tactic used in the right moment, but not a universal solution. Germany's enemies adapted. They developed deeper defenses, learned to disrupt communication between panzer units and air support. They improved their own mobility, built better tanks, created more coordinated responses. Blitzkrieg had forced the world to evolve. And now, that evolution was turning against the Reich. The Allies studied the German methods and refined them. The United States and Britain implemented combined arms warfare, using mechanized infantry, tanks, and aircraft in perfect synchronization. In Normandy, during the D-Day landings, they applied lessons learned from Blitzkrieg against the Germans themselves. And this time, it was the German defenses that collapsed under pressure. The legacy of Blitzkrieg is not just in the battles it won or the fear it inspired. It changed how wars would be fought forever. It showed that mobility, coordination, and psychological shock could achieve in weeks what traditional armies had failed to achieve in years. It shattered old doctrines. It redefined military thinking. And yet, it also proved that no tactic, no matter how brilliant, can win a war alone. Strategy matters. Logistics matter. Human will matters. Blitzkrieg dazzled the world. But it couldn't sustain the weight of a global conflict. As the war dragged on, Blitzkrieg became less a strategy and more a memory. What had once been Germany's greatest strength was now a crumbling myth. The tides had turned. The Soviet Union pushed west with ferocious momentum. The Red Army, restructured and reinforced, mirrored some of the very principles they had learned through bitter experience. Their own offensives now emphasized speed, armor, and deep penetration, turning the tables with a brutal irony. Operation Bagration in 1944 crushed German Army Group Center in Belarus with a swiftness and power that shocked even the Allies. In many ways, the Soviets had perfected the concept of deep operations, and used it with even greater scale. The Germans, once masters of fast warfare, were now on the receiving end, unable to regroup, unable to counter. Their myth of lightning war had been taken, adapted, and weaponized against them. In the West, Allied forces surged through France after the breakout from Normandy. The German army, once the model of discipline and organization, found itself retreating in disarray. Every retreat meant another blow to the illusion of superiority. German generals began to admit what had long been whispered: Blitzkrieg had never been an official doctrine. It was a term coined by journalists, a convenient label for what was essentially a temporary advantage. But it had become a crutch. A symbol of power that Germany relied on again and again, even when the conditions no longer favored it. Hitler clung to the dream of quick, decisive victories, even as the reality grew darker. He poured resources into offensive operations that had no chance of succeeding, hoping to reignite the lightning. But the spark was gone. The war had changed. Blitzkrieg was born in a narrow window of opportunity. A time when Germany's enemies were unprepared, when the world still fought the previous war. It succeeded because it was new. It shocked. It disrupted. But once the world caught up, once defenses adapted, the strategy faltered. And yet, even as the Third Reich crumbled, the legacy of Blitzkrieg endured. Military thinkers around the world dissected every aspect of it. Commanders took notes. Generals rewrote manuals. The Cold War that followed was shaped by the lessons of World War II, and Blitzkrieg was one of its most influential teachers. Armies became faster, more mobile. Coordination between air and ground forces became standard. The concept of joint operations took root. And while the word Blitzkrieg faded, its essence lived on. In later conflicts, echoes of Blitzkrieg could be seen in American shock and awe campaigns. In Israel's swift victories in the Six-Day War. In modern doctrines that prioritize speed, disruption, and psychological dominance. Technology changed. Drones, precision-guided missiles, cyber warfare, all tools unimagined in the 1940s, but the core ideas of surprise, speed, and coordination remained powerful. The world had learned the power of the lightning strike. And it would never forget, but there was also a darker lesson. Blitzkrieg wasn't just a military tactic. It was a symbol of how fast destruction can spread when combined with ideology and ambition. It was the spear point of a regime that sought domination through fear and violence. The speed with which nations fell under the Nazi boot wasn't just a testament to German military innovation, it was a warning. That democracies unprepared to defend themselves, that alliances fractured by indecision, that leaders clinging to outdated tactics, all can fall in an instant. The world watched it happen. And the world remembered. The survivors of those early conquests carried scars deeper than the maps could show. Civilians who watched their countries fall in days. Soldiers who never saw the enemy until it was too late. Families torn apart by invasions they never believed possible. The fear of Blitzkrieg was not just the fear of defeat. It was the fear of helplessness. Of waking up and realizing your world had changed overnight, and yet, resistance was born in those same moments. Underground networks formed. Intelligence services evolved. Communication improved. New alliances rose. Blitzkrieg may have begun as a show of invincibility, but it ended by uniting the world against tyranny. It reminded people that war is not won by speed alone. That hearts and minds matter. That courage can outlast shock. That even lightning fades. By the end of the war, the very generals who had led Blitzkrieg campaigns were in hiding, on trial, or dead. The world moved on. But military academies continued to study their strategies, their failures, and their brief brilliance. It was impossible to deny the impact. Blitzkrieg changed the way wars would be fought, how they would be prepared, how nations would organize their defenses and train their armies. It forced everyone to think faster, plan deeper, act bolder, and so, Blitzkrieg lives on, not as a celebration, but as a lesson. A warning about the dangers of complacency. About how quickly peace can be shattered. About the double-edged nature of innovation. The Germans believed they had found the key to unstoppable warfare. And for a moment, they had. But no weapon, no tactic, no strategy exists in a vacuum. The world responds. It adapts. And even lightning must eventually meet the storm. Today, in a world shaped by satellite surveillance, artificial intelligence, and globalized defense, the principles of Blitzkrieg still whisper through the silence before a strike. In the speed of drones, in the coordination of modern battle groups, in the seamless integration of air and ground forces. The tools have changed. The battlefield has evolved. But the ghost of lightning war remains, and we remember not just because it worked, but because it almost changed everything. Because it showed us how quickly the world could fall apart. Because it proved that wars are not just won with weapons, but with ideas. With momentum. With timing. And with the terrifying silence that comes just before the storm, that is the story of Blitzkrieg. Silent. Fast. Deadly. And unforgettable.